Hey, and welcome to 23 Degrees Sideways. The narrative, such as it is, has slipped. Or maybe the narrative has taken over. Something's happened. So, as I record this, the Supreme Court has recently ruled against the state of New York, city of New York, New York's, plural, with some religious freedom cases. Now, of course, this is the coronavirus pandemic over response kind of situation that we're dealing with. And the Supreme Court said, well, no, actually, you can't just end the Constitution because you claim there's a public health crisis. Now, Chief Justice Roberts really doesn't like this. He seems to have gone to, you read his dissent, and it seems like he's trying to find some weasel logic to make the Constitution not important or not count, or he's really, really, really heavy on the idea that the government can do whatever it wants if it says it's important, or if he agrees with it. And that's actually one of the things that it really is really bugging me, is I can't get past this flavor of personal involvement, personal ideology, personal agreement in this case with Roberts, especially since Roberts got he got excoriated. Like he got run through the thresher, man, with people talking about what he did with the Nevada case earlier in the year, because the governor of Nevada had said that because he can't regulate, put in control watchers and police and stuff, agents of the government, into churches the way he can with casinos, then the governor had an ability to restrict churches in a way that he didn't restrict casinos, because he had no control inside the facilities. And it's just really bizarre and twisted. And what Roberts did at that time was horrible and abysmal and absolutely just the logic, the legal reasoning was bad. If you're a law nerd, it was bad. Now, what Cuomo did in response to this decision, there's so much that's wrong with this. Okay, so first, Roberts says that they shouldn't have ruled on this because the governor removed the restrictions when it went to the Supreme Court. Well, no, there's nothing to stop him from putting them back, and this is one of the areas where Roberts really went off his rails. Like, there's a thing about mootness that doesn't always apply, and it's a doctrine where the government can go back and do it at will. Then mootness does not apply anymore, and it is a doctrine. It's there. You can go look it up. It's not like I'm making this up. Well, Cuomo is in full weird mode. Okay, so Cuomo, in the emergency, declared state of emergency because of the coronavirus pandemic, because Cuomo has mishandled it ridiculously, and New York, as with many Democratic states that have high urban populations and massive lockdowns and massive requirements and massive mandates and massive mask wearing, are doing really shitty. That's just, you don't need to look at why. There's the pragmatic aspect of statistics where first you figure out what's happening. And what's happening is the states that are doing the mask mandates and the lockdowns and the travel restrictions and checkpoints on the bridges and all of the threats and the the no gardening and the no canoeing except for me, and they're doing the worst by and large. It's not an exclusive thing because there's the weather component, so California's not doing as bad as New York, and there's a lot of the weather and vitamin D issues in there, but pragmatic statistics, first you figure out what's going on. New York's not doing so good. New York's not doing so good because people in Arizona aren't locking down. That's not the reason. That's what the media will tell you, South Dakota is bad, and that's why the United States has such a high death rate or COVID case count, and all of the vast majority of them are in the New England and Atlantic coast regions. Well, that's not South Dakota. Whatever. Cuomo thinks that his emergency power orders, regulations, guidelines, whatever his executive decisions are the law. So his response to the Supreme Court decision is about the law. He's the law. Okay, he's actually confused himself to the point with the media narrative where he no longer actually bases his opinions, his actions, or his speech in legal reality, observable reality. He's literally running the narrative, okay? If a dumb reporter who never finished a decent class on history but managed to become an activist reporter somehow says, oh, it's the law, Cuomo just believes it. Like, he's fallen into the media thing, which is really funny because Donald Trump has been the most media aware president we've ever had. Like, when the media says something, the media will say, oh, well, maybe this is a thing or this isn't a thing, and Trump's like, hey, didn't the media say that this was a thing or isn't a thing? And then, of course, the media goes and does exactly the opposite, says exactly the opposite, and calls him stupid. Any number of cases. Masks are actually a really good example of this. Coronavirus itself is a really good example of this. So Cuomo seems to have fallen for the narrative. Like, he talks about anything he says being the law, He's gone and he's decided that people who don't do exactly what he says are dictators. Dictators. If you don't do what I say, you're a dictator. And he literally says that local law enforcement agencies, county-level elected sheriffs, who don't want to enforce his strangest and most ridiculous edicts, which are not laws, are not law enforcement. They don't qualify as law enforcement, and he hopes that they don't ask for help because he won't give it to them. I mean, you're like, he's not there. He's gone for the sophomoric Twitter logic, okay? There's always that dude on the internet who's like, well, if you don't like welfare, then you shouldn't be allowed to have it. If you vote against it, even if you pay into it, if you vote against it, you shouldn't be allowed to have it. If you voted against Obamacare, you shouldn't be allowed to have any insurance at all. That kind of logic, Cuomo's like right in there. Something is very wrong with the logic and the thinking. I know that he's a media politician, way more than Trump is. Cuomo is like exactly a creature of the media and the moment, and it's horrible to watch. But it's like he's lost the basic foundations of reality. He's kind of broken free and he's floating around in media space. Okay? It's really weird. He really doesn't like this decision. He disagrees with the decision, and he's basically trying. He's got his state government trying to claim that the decision doesn't apply to anyone outside of these specific boroughs in New York City. So all the other restrictions can be in place because the Supreme Court didn't really say that. And, this whole thing is like, it's not an argument about the virus. It's not an argument about spreading the virus because no one's actually talking about reasonable and rational responses. I did a video on the illogic of how we handle lockdowns and restrictions. And it's very applicable right now because what you're talking about with this Supreme Court decision is no, you can't just upend the Constitution completely and get rid of all civil liberties. However, the Supreme Court is willing to have some deference. If you want to have mask policies that are reasonable, rational, then apparently that's a thing that's okay to do because who knows why masks don't seem to do anything according to actual research, but whatever. if you want to have capacity limits, like all buildings that have public space have a 50% capacity limit, then that's fine. That applies to the churches, and that's fine. Okay? And there's nothing in there that does not that does not specifically restrict religious liberty unless you make it like 5%. Okay, if you make it 5%, then you've got to have you're going to have some serious arguments, and you're going to have to prove to the court that strict scrutiny is being met, not just, oh, there's a pandemic and we said so, because that's another thing. Roberts is like, the public health officials should decide. No, they shouldn't. They should advise. Okay, and frankly, their advice so far has sucked. And that's you can't run the country based on the idea that anything some doctor says has to become an edict from a executive authority. That's you. So Cuomo seems to have gone off the deep end. We know that the Massachusetts governor has. The Vermont governor, he's actually he's taking kids back into school, having them report on their parents, and if he decides, like, somehow, if a 7-year-old kid says the wrong thing to a teacher, then the teacher about what his holiday was like. If a 7-year-old kid has a holiday, and then a teacher asks leading questions, and we know that you can just lead a child to an answer. We've got lots and lots of case law, history, psychology. We know how this works. You can even go all the way to false memories. So a kid has a dinner, and then you're talking to a 7-year-old kid, and you ask some leading questions so that you get a report that matches what you want, because you want to, like, do something, right? So the teacher, who's not a psychologist, not a therapist, not a trained counselor, not a trained interrogator, not a law enforcement official, has no training, authority, responsibility, or anything to do with this, then takes it to some law enforcement agency that arbitrarily decides that these parents have to go to mandatory re-education training and possibly quarantine, and somewhere around never there's a court involved or any due process. I mean, the Vermont governor is just way out there too. There's no. What do you want to do? What do you want to do? Have no one die from coronavirus. That's what you want. Okay, but they keep getting lost in this weird authoritarian space, and not actually talking about what they want, like what the goal is. The goal isn't the goal, because the goal is just seems to be a placeholder so they can talk about stuff. Or a placeholder to excuse authoritarian excesses. I really don't understand. Watching Cuomo, listening to Cuomo, reading the articles, I think he's lost it. Like, just lost touch with the reality aspects of this. There's some stuff going on here that just doesn't make sense, doesn't seem right, doesn't seem rational. And it's not the irrationality of humans behave irrationally. It's just off the reservation. You're not law enforcement, and we won't help you if you don't do, like Northam, the governor of Virginia, with the sanctuary counties, talking about how he's going to fire and remove from office sheriffs who are elected by their counties because they didn't do what he wanted. None of this is grounded in anything that has to do with reality, like how the nation was founded, how society works, the reality of a disease or an event or a virus. The virus is not the disease. That's why I separate the two. It's based on some sort of authoritarian ideal, and when you base something on a thought, on an ideal, on a non-reality, things can get really squirrely really fast. You gotta get in touch with the ground periodically. It's fine to have the thoughts, to think, if we just had an intelligent elite, which I am of course one of, that can tell everyone what to do and they obey, everything will be good. Fine, whatever floats your boat. I'll fight you to the death, but fine, whatever floats your boat. You still have to touch the ground and make that ideal apply to reality somehow, and they've lost that, especially Cuomo right now. He literally thinks that what he says is the law just because he said it. I don't know, man. It's watching the Supreme Court decision was really good. The other thing Cuomo did was talk about the Supreme Court decision as if it was a Trump political decision, as if the idea of constitutional protection is specifically a Trumpist idea, he separated this out into a very political talking point for him, or speech for him. Very politically oriented, motivated. He defined the idea of going against his edicts as a Republican plot, as a Trumpist plot, he made the court into an evil creature. He doesn't understand that people could be looking at the Constitution, or the state of the law, or the state of what's actually being ordered. It's literally about, I said this and I'm the guy, versus everything else. But trying to make this into a Trump thing, again, it's Cuomo. He seems to have lost it and believes that anything that the media says is right, so it's a Trump plot. There's going to be a Trump conspiracy for the next 20 years. The deep state. It's like QAnon in reverse or some shit, right? He's lost touch with reality, and he's living in a narrative. And I think that's not going to be very good for New York. Sure is fun to watch, though. Stay sideways.